Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind today's headlines. How's your week been, Dave?
Good, yeah. Just rolling along here, getting closer to my 49th birthday next Tuesday.
Okay, so we're admitting the number now. Last time it was 35.
Gained a fortnight in a week. So
okay.
It's still been a good week, even though it feels like 14 years. So
Yeah. Well, 49 isn't 50, so that's positive. All right, well, good. So last week and this week, we've kind of paired these episodes together as we're taking a look at the key battleground states for the presidential election. Last week, I'm sure you all listened, but in case you didn't, we talked about Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona. 3 states that are traditional states that need to go red in order for a Republican candidate to win. This week, we're shifting our focus to Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, 3 states that until the last election were thought to be part of the big blue wall that would guarantee a Democratic victory. And of course, 2 of those 3 went Republican last time and contributed to Donald Trump's surprising victory over Hillary Clinton. Big news, of course, coming out of that region: Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, all very excited by the return of Big Ten football. Will that be the deciding factor here?
I remember way back when, maybe 2 months ago, saying that there's something about the Big Ten not playing or playing that would have an impact on the election. So I was kind of interesting that this week President Trump taking credit for peace in the Middle East and football in the Midwest.
So let's turn to the headlines. And again, our focus is going to be on Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And Dave's going to give us some analysis of some of the key counties to look at in those particular states. But before we go there, we just want to take a big picture view of the overall map. If you go on RealClearPolitics, which is our kind of go-to site for all of this, they've got Joe Biden starting with 222 electoral college votes and 125 for Donald Trump, with 191 listed as toss-up. Now we're going to take 10 of those 222 and put them in the toss-up pile, that's Minnesota, and say there's basically 201 votes in play. Now we can imagine outlier circumstances where you get a big Biden win or a surprising Trump victory. There's plenty of days between now and election day, but let's assume those are pretty well locked in. And if you think then about what's going to happen for Donald Trump to win, he's going to have to get 145 electoral college votes out of those 201. Or to put it a different way, he can only afford to lose 56. Right? He's got to get about 70% of those votes. And of course, if Joe Biden can get 58, then Joe Biden wins. Obviously, 57 is the disaster scenario of a deadlock tie, and we go to the House of Representatives. Now, it's interesting, given the groups of states we're looking at last week and this week, that Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, together, that's 56 electoral college votes. Okay, so it's theoretically possible that President Trump could lose all those states, all 4 of those states, and win the election if he can carry all the other toss-up states. That would include New Hampshire and Nevada and Texas and Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, etc. So if he gets all those other states, he can afford to lose Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. On the other hand, the 3 states we looked at last week, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona, total those up, you get 55. So again, there is actually a theoretical path where he loses Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona and can still get to 270, or in this case, 271 electoral college votes if he wins all those other toss-up states. Now, another way of looking at this is to look at the polls and to work our way down the list from those states where he's furthest behind Joe Biden to the states where he's the closest. And so if you do it this way, Minnesota is the state furthest out of reach. Joe Biden has about a 10-point lead there in the RealClearPolitics average. Next is Wisconsin, 6.7-point lead. Then we come to Arizona at 5, Michigan just under 5. So that's 47 electoral college votes. Assuming he wins all the other ones, that would mean he'd have to get Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Nevada, the rest of those toss-up states. He can win, losing those 4 that are furthest away from victory at this particular stage of the campaign. But it does mean he's got to win Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, we're currently, according to the Real Clear Politics average, he's about 4.3 points behind. And of course, it assumes he gets Florida, North Carolina as well. So this is the map as it's beginning to settle down. And as you look at the map, Dave, and as you think about some of the research that you've done and some of the analysis that you've done, what are the kind of scenarios that you're looking at, that you're imagining watching for come November 3rd?
A Halloween type scenarios or scenario. So one of the neat features on the Real Clear Politics site is that you can create your own map. So you just click the Create Your Own Map button, and then what'll happen there is you can take a look at the states that are in gray, that are toss-up states, and you can put them in one of the 2 campaigns. So first thing I'm going to do when I look at your map that you have there, Biden at 212 and Trump at 125, is I'm going to take Texas, 38 electoral college votes, and I'm going to put that in the Trump camp. I'm going to do the same thing with Iowa. I'm going to do the same thing with Georgia. And then from last week's conversation, I think I came out of that research more confident that Trump could hold Florida and hold North Carolina, but in all likelihood, he is going to lose Arizona. He's going to lose Nevada. He's going to lose New Hampshire. So when I do that, and I give Trump Maine 2nd Congressional District and Nebraska 2nd Congressional District, we are left with 64 electoral college votes, or 74, excuse me. And those 74 consist of the following 5 states: Minnesota 10, Wisconsin 10, Michigan 16, Ohio 18, and Pennsylvania 20. I give Trump Ohio. Track with me here. I give Biden Michigan. And now where we're at, 249 to 249, with the 3 states that we want to discuss today. Minnesota 10, Wisconsin 10, Pennsylvania 20. Now, what did my research tell me today? I think that Trump very likely takes the state of Pennsylvania. He's popular there in regions. I think he can continue to build upon his success in 2016. But I think that Minnesota and Wisconsin are further out of reach.
Don't do this, Dave.
No, if I had to make my prediction, make my map on September 19th, 2020, my map has 269 electoral college votes for Joe Biden and 269 electoral college votes for the president. I mean, that's an amazing result.
Yeah, I told you this was possible last week when you looked at the simulations. So this is not just conjecture, right? This is research.
Okay, so these are the Democratic states that you'd think would go Democratic doing just that. The Republican states that you think would go Republican, and congressional districts that have gone Republican going Republican. And then you're left with the 6 states that we're talking about last week and this week. And in our conversation last week, Arizona seemed very far out of reach. Florida and North Carolina more in reach. He's won those states before. They're good, strong Republican states. I can see him winning North Carolina and Florida again. And then we get to this week, where I think of the 3 states that we're talking about, he's most well-positioned to do well in Pennsylvania and least well-positioned in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So this is not a Halloween scenario that couldn't happen.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on it, but only 2020 could do this to us.
Yeah, and then like War of the Worlds, sometime late November, early December, right? You just have to get all of them, all of the bad things that could happen. So
Right. All right. Very good. Thanks. Appreciate this. All right. So 538, building upon your analysis there, had an article this week entitled "Why Pennsylvania Could Decide the 2020 Election." And it looks at shifting voting patterns in the state and its importance to both Biden and Trump's pathways to 270 electoral college votes. And so according to their calculations, the state had a 31% chance of being the most important state in the election, the one that tipped the election one way or the other. And they also found, kind of the way we were looking at things last week, that if Trump wins Pennsylvania, he wins 84% of the time in their simulations. And if Biden wins Pennsylvania, he wins 96% of the time. So again, both sides, this is one of those states that makes a huge difference. We said Florida was that kind of a state last time, and now we're saying Pennsylvania, especially of the three that we're looking at today, has this outsized influence on the overall outcome of the race. And again, not surprising because these are the two largest states we're talking about, 20 electoral college votes in the case of Pennsylvania and 29 in the case of Florida. So let's start with Pennsylvania, Dave. Let's take our deeper dive. I know you've done a bit of research on this, so take us through some of the key indicators we can be looking for between now and the election and election eve as we try to figure out just which way Pennsylvania is going to go.
Well, when I looked at Pennsylvania, what I saw is an important macro level shift that's taken place between 2008 and 2016 that's heading in the right direction for Republicans, and in particular, because this is going to be a central tenet of what I have to say, in particular for President Trump. In 2008, Senator Obama received 3.276 million votes, about 600,000 more than John McCain with 2,656,000 votes. In 2012, President Obama's vote count went down dramatically. He lost 300,000 votes down to 2.99 million votes. Mitt Romney had about the same amount of votes as John McCain, so it made it a closer election. In 2016, Hillary Clinton received 2.926 million votes. So once again, another slide of about 60,000 votes. But here's where there's an important difference between Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Minnesota. President Trump won 300,000 more votes in Pennsylvania than both Mitt Romney and John McCain 4 years and 8 years before him. So he outperformed the early Republicans, as you saw, a Democratic slide in Pennsylvania. And I think that if I had to explain this, given the research that I did, one word that kept on coming up over and over and over again as to why Republicans are doing better in Pennsylvania, and in particular why many Republicans like President Trump in Pennsylvania, is the word condescension. This idea that the Democratic Party and its candidates had been condescending to rural folk. So it doesn't take too much to think back to that important line by President Obama, where he refers to working class voters in old industrial towns and says, they get bitter. They cling to their guns or religion or antipathy to people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. Perhaps the line that most captures this idea of condescension. And I think it's really kind of a reaction to that condescension that has served President Trump well in Pennsylvania, and I think might serve him well once again in this election in 2020. With this caveat, I'll say it over and over again in today's show, perhaps the worst candidate that Democrats could have put forward in the Midwest, in a place that is reeling, was Hillary Clinton, who seems to be the perfect representation of the condescending personality who doesn't care for the people in these places. And this is seen, by the way, in the particular instance of Bucks County, a county that has working class Democrats. It has moderate Republicans, and it has more of your lifelong Reagan Republicans there as well. And that's a place where she did well among elite voters, but she had a much harder time convincing lifelong Democrats, working class Democrats to vote for her. So if what's happening in Bucks County, and likewise what will be happening in the western part of the state in Erie County, happens to Joe Biden again, then he's in great and serious trouble in Pennsylvania. Can he overcome that Clinton persona? A lot of people say, well, he's six-pack Joe, he can, but that'll be very, very important if he's going to hold off Donald Trump in the state.
And you wonder how much his personal connections to Scranton, and certainly it seems a little bit different from the way that Hillary Clinton repositioned herself.
Yeah, and two other words that may help out Joe Biden more than they did Hillary Clinton, that were in many of these articles, a sense of loyalty and a sense of strength. They wanted those two things in a candidate. And you often see, right, the Joe Biden commercials emphasizing that he has roots here, he's strong, he's a loyal person, he knows, what you've gone through, and he's going to tend to your security. That's another key element that I saw in these articles. So we'll see whether or not he's able to do it. But Pennsylvania seemed to be of the three states we're talking about today, kind of the perfect storm for President Trump once again, a place where I feel very confident that if he works there over the next 7 or 8 weeks, that he could very well take Pennsylvania again.
And, one thing that's surprised me to this point is it doesn't seem like the Trump campaign has been able to make as much with some of the environmental policies that Biden has embraced, especially really turning over his environmental policy to AOC and to the left-wing part of the party. You would think that would have a lot of impact on the voters in Pennsylvania, especially Western Pennsylvania. And I think it has had some, but I guess to me, that seems like a story that hasn't quite been fully told or fully exploited by the Trump campaign to date. All right, let's shift our focus now to Wisconsin. So the state that probably came to represent the follies of the Hillary Clinton campaign, had never visited. They thought they had this solidly in their corner, despite the fact, of course, that Scott Walker had won election, re-election, won a recall election, had demonstrated that Republicans were viable statewide candidates there. President Trump was a narrow victory on election night in 2016. What's your analysis show about the prospects of a Trump or a Biden victory in Wisconsin, Dave?
Well, in Wisconsin, as in Pennsylvania, there's been a steep decline in the Democratic presidential vote over the last 8 years. You had President Obama receiving 1.67 million votes in 2008. That number declined about 60,000 in 2012 to 1.62 million, and then declined, as you mentioned, tremendously in the 2016 race. Hillary Clinton only received 1.382 million votes, a decline of 240,000 votes. It's a dramatic decline of 15 to 20% of the vote from the 2012 election. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, John McCain received 1.26 million votes in 2008. Romney, perhaps with help from Paul Ryan, his vice presidential running mate, received 1.4 million, a little over 1.4 million, and Trump received around the same, 1.4 million in 2016. So actually, Trump received less votes than Romney in Wisconsin, but won Wisconsin, which is the telltale of what happened there. So what I wanted to do in Wisconsin is take a look at, where were the counties where there was a dramatic shift in the vote. And there are two counties in particular, and we'll thank our research assistant once again, who we're looking for a pseudonym for highlighting these two counties, Juneau County and Richland County, which are rather small counties, 18 to 25,000 individuals. But in both of these counties went dramatically in the direction of President Trump in 2016. So let me put that in real terms. In 2012, the Democratic candidate received 53% of the vote. The Republican candidate received 46%. Trump increased that number from 46 to 61% in Juneau County. So he really kind of flipped the electorate in Juneau County. And the same thing happens in Richland County. So the question is, what is going on in these counties that make Trump so appealing? So I took a look at economic data, and certainly these counties haven't fared well economically over the last 10 years. They're counties that really over the last 70 years, they have population increases and then declines. And really steadily over the last 10 or 12 years, people have been moving out of these counties. So then I went to the local newspapers, the Juneau County Star-Times and the Richland Center Newsbreak. And it was really interesting when you looked at those two newspapers as to what's being highlighted in the local news. And really two things come out over and over again in local news: crime and COVID over and over again through the pages of these papers. So then I looked at crime data in both of these counties. And what I saw was that crime data was actually going down. But when you look at the newspaper coverage of what's happening in these rural counties, it paints a rather bleak picture. It'll be interesting. This is, I think, the key. In the exurban to suburban parts of Wisconsin, where there's been a less dramatic shift in terms of the economy and all the rest, will those people come out and vote for President Trump, or will they vote for Joe Biden? And someone who knows a lot about Wisconsin politics, Scott Walker, emphasized just this. He said, for President Trump to win Wisconsin, he has to win those cities with populations somewhere between 30 and 150,000 people to win.
Yeah, and you wonder, this was one of the stories that the Democrats were trying to tell at their convention. Say, well, okay, you have this group of people that are down and out. They've struggled across the decades, but now you've been president for 4 years. And if things haven't improved, if COVID is the story and the secondary story is crime, and you've been president all this time, obviously the Democratic message is, shouldn't you have fixed this? You wonder if the same playbook will work for Donald Trump 4 years into his presidency that worked in 2016. Can you still be the outsider who cares in a way that Democrats say they care but actually haven't?
Yeah, and that was interesting, that what you pointed out, that Donald Trump in Wisconsin is running as the outsider candidate, the non-Washington, D.C. candidate, which is interesting. And if he can pull that off, and certainly there's a way I think that he can pull that off, if he can point out that he's kind of up against forces in Washington, D.C. that wouldn't allow him to do some of the things that he would like to do, and that he needs to do more of them, perhaps he can win over those voters. But that's going to be a problem for him if voters don't buy that. And then the second thing is that, of course, when you lose 240,000 votes between 2012 and 2016, you pay closer attention to the state. And I think this is exactly what I saw in doing research, that Democrats are working Milwaukee hard in particular. In addition to Madison, they have great get out the vote efforts, or better get out the vote efforts than they had in 2016, which isn't saying that much, but we'll see. I do think right now, if I had to pick between the two candidates who would win Wisconsin, I would probably go pretty strong with Joe Biden right now in Wisconsin.
Excellent analysis there. So let's now shift our focus to the last of the three states, Minnesota. We mentioned that the poll numbers there are pretty strongly in Biden's favor, but there's been a lot of talk about Minnesota being a state that Donald Trump could surprise in, sort of maybe the Wisconsin of this cycle. And yet, you look back through the history, it hasn't been since 1972 the Republican actually won in Minnesota. And of course, that includes Ronald Reagan's landslide in 1984, where Minnesota, the home state of Walter Mondale, was the one state that he lost, in addition to Washington, D.C. So you wonder, is this a real possibility?
Well, the good news for President Trump is that in terms of the amount of counties that went Republican in 2016, it's a dramatic shift. So when you look at the state, most of the state is red, county by county, and that is definitely a difference than what you saw in 2012 or 2008. So if that continues to happen, right? You heard of the Iron Range in Minnesota, those northern parts of Minnesota, that rural part of Minnesota, voting for President Trump. I think if that's a continued shift, then that bodes well for the president, and probably is a reason why there's a lot of energy behind this idea that Minnesota could go for Trump. So if it's true that President Trump is going to continue to do well in rural counties, that's good for his campaign. But I think he's going to have to do better in these more independent, diverse counties closer to the Twin Cities, such as Dakota and Washington counties. These are counties, by the way, in which Republicans did quite well in 2008 and 2012, but in which Donald Trump's performance in 2016 was quite disappointing. For example, Donald Trump receives 5,000 less votes in Washington County and 10,000 less votes in Dakota County than did Mitt Romney. So even though Hillary Clinton did not do well in these counties or did not do as well as Barack Obama, she's still able to take the counties and still able to take Minnesota. So the question is, well, why? A lot of what you hear when you read into these counties is this kind of great sense of independence and of balance and kind of the middle of the road and kind of a Minnesota pride in not being excessive in one direction or another. So, I mean, that may be particular to those two suburban counties, but that's very important. If a lot of Minnesota can be won by President Trump by winning those suburban and exurban places, and those places are defined by their commitment to being middle of the road, independent, or wanting balance, those certainly aren't words or concepts that you think of when you consider the Trump presidency, or at least the way that it's been reported and the way that kind of he's acted out the role. So I'm wondering whether this is, I think, the key for those counties, is the way that he talks about politics. Does that turn more people off than the hyper-progressivism that has also turned Minnesota people off? So it's kind of a question of two excesses, and which excess will be the demise of the Trump campaign or of the Democratic Party in 2020?
Great. Well, that's going to wrap up our survey of these three battleground Midwestern states, Big Ten country states. Sounds like, Dave, that Pennsylvania is the most likely to land in the Trump column, and that Wisconsin and Minnesota will be challenging. But as we've seen looking at the map, there's really no path to victory for President Trump without that Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida nexus.
Yeah, that would be my key takeaway as well, Matt. I think that he has to win those three states: Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and that's where his energy should be these next 7 weeks. So that's my takeaway of our last 2 weeks of research.
And it wouldn't hurt if he snagged another small state somewhere so we could avoid the 269 disaster.
Yeah, which if I had to guess right now, I would say New Hampshire, would be that kind of tipping point state. We both spent a good amount of time. I grew up in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire has an independent streak within it, and it can go one way or another. I wouldn't be surprised to see Vice President Pence, President Trump, Kamala Harris, and or Joe Biden in New Hampshire quite a bit as well in the next 6 or 7 weeks.
New Hampshireites tend to get their access to presidential candidates. All right. Well, that's going to then be our transition to the required reading. And yesterday was Constitution Day, the 233rd anniversary of the signing of the Constitution by members of the convention. And our goal last week and this week was to have one eye on the presidential race and one eye beyond. And so in honor of Constitution Day, Yuval Levin had a great piece up at National Review talking about the Constitution and really asking the question, which seemed like an obvious question, but he had an interesting answer. What is the Constitution? And his analysis as he worked his way through the answer was that there's really 4 different ways of thinking about what the Constitution is. I mean, the same document and all 4 answers, but 4 different ways the Constitution works, 4 different jobs, you might say, the Constitution takes up. What he's trying to do in the piece is push us toward a deeper level of engagement with the Constitution and a deeper appreciation for its role in the American regime. So here's his understanding of what the Constitution is. Number one, it's a legal framework. And so we think about when judges have to decide constitutional questions, they have a text that they go to. And so when they have to figure out what does interstate commerce mean in Article 1, Section 8, they go to the text, they work through that, they make rulings on that basis. Secondly, the Constitution is a policy-making framework. It sets the boundaries between state and federal power. It describes the basic process whereby policy is made. Think about the Article 1, Section 8 list of powers. Here's the things the national government does. Here's things that states implicitly can do that aren't on that list. So as you're thinking about how you advance your policy goals, you think about doing that within the boundaries of the Constitution. Those are the two, by the way, that he thinks most people focus on when they think about the Constitution. The legal framework, the big constitutional decisions that Supreme Courts make, and then the policy side of it. How do I advance my agenda? But there's two more. Thirdly, he mentions an institutional framework. And here's where he's talking about the three branches of the government. And while this seems like third grade civics, he develops this, I think, in a very interesting way to show the significance, not just of the fact that we have three branches, but that one of them is a legislative branch, and one is an executive branch, and one is a judicial branch. And that, in other words, there's actually distinct functions. When you think about why we have three branches, it's not just because we want to have more than one voice and we're worried about power being concentrated in this one group versus that one group. It actually corresponds with things that exist in nature, that there's actually a legislative function the government must perform. It has to make laws. There's actually an executive function, the carrying out of those laws, and it requires different attributes in the individuals who lead those two branches. Someone who's an excellent executive may not be an excellent legislator, and vice versa. Likewise, judges. We need judges. There's a judicial function that's distinct from making laws and executing laws. And again, those that are good at doing that job may not be good at the other two jobs. And the fourth thing, he says it's a political framework. And this is where, sort of at the broadest, most abstract level, what is the Constitution? The Constitution is the preamble, right? It's the grand vision that all the particular details are meant to serve. The fact that you have to be 25 years old to serve in the House of Representatives is not a particularly important detail, except insofar as it advances a bigger vision, a vision captured well explicitly in the preamble, implicitly in the broader story the Constitution tells, in conjunction with documents like the Declaration of Independence, as it aims for certain ultimate ends, ultimate political purposes. So again, his concern is that we miss these last two when we think about politics and the Constitution, and that because of that, our politics has been impoverished. Our politics focuses on whatever our party can ram through the Congress, or maybe even more so, we're focused on getting that big win at the Supreme Court, finding the test case, getting our justices on board, creating enough social pressure behind our position so we can win that Supreme Court victory, and by fiat, get imposed upon the nation the policy that we desire. That's where the political action is. And we miss out on deeper, more permanent reflections on doing this institutional role and this political role well. And so, for example, we have a Congress that really underperforms its function. Where are laws made today? Well, some laws are made by Congress, but too often it's a very broad framework that comes out of Congress, and then all the real legislative work is done by the administrative state under the leadership of the president, or by the judiciary, right, where it interprets the Constitution in new ways, enforces new rights, and rather than the process of negotiation which takes place in a Congress, say, whereby everybody gives a little bit in order to get a bill through, Supreme Court decisions don't work that way. When the Supreme Court strikes down a law, the law's gone. Right? There's no negotiation or compromise. And that gets us back to this institutional framework problem, that when judges become legislators, they can't legislate well. It's not just that they shouldn't do this, but they can't, because of the judicial function, do the job well. Likewise, when executives become legislators, they can't do the job well. And so what Levin's trying to get us to do, Dave, is to think more broadly about the Constitution and to really re-engage the particular vision of a tripartite government that undergirds the Constitution, and to appreciate the significance of the roles of these branches in a context where all we really seem to care about is the next political win.
Yeah, which begs the question, well, why do we focus on the legal framework and the policymaking framework and less on the institutional and political framework? Right? There's that oft-quoted line from Benjamin Franklin that we've given you a republic if you can keep it. There's a duty or responsibility of the people to keep the republic. Maintaining the institutional framework and the political framework of the Constitution can only be done if people with a certain character want it to be done, both those who are office holders and those who are voting for those office holders. There's that famous expression in Tocqueville's Democracy in America that our system lends itself to us being more than kings and less than men. We're kings on Tuesday, November 3rd. Then thereafter, we go to being less than men as these legal and policy-making frameworks work themselves out. We've done our job. We've voted for our candidate. Now we can sit back and hope that what we wanted will happen. But that's not the way that a republic functions, that a healthy republic functions. It functions on the basis of a people having a certain character and their leaders having a certain character. Those are difficult things. It's more difficult to pursue good character than it is to perhaps pass a piece of legislation. Because it calls upon you to realize what power you've been granted, what power you have not, what it means to fulfill the function of being an executive or a legislator or an adjudicator well, and as a citizen to likewise look for those characteristics in the people who are running for those offices or who will nominate and appoint people for those offices. So I think Levin's piece to me suggests that there is what is wrong has a lot to do with what we're unwilling to do after an election to help make things right.
I think one of the things I appreciate about the piece is the way that he emphasizes the distinction, which I think we've missed a lot in our politics, between what's legal, what's legally possible, what's maybe politically possible, and what's right under our constitutional system. So if you think about the Constitution merely as this legal framework, then you're constantly scouring it to say, okay, so let's try to figure out necessary and proper. Does that include this? Does that include that? Right? And so you're focused on the details and you're looking for the loophole. You've got a certain agenda that you're trying to impose, and you're trying to figure out a way to get that as close to constitutional as possible. And what Levin wants you to do is just take a step back and say, yeah, but there's actually an overarching ethic to the constitutional system. And so you might find a way to justify your pet project under the Constitution. There might be nothing that a court could say, nah, you can't do that. There's no lawsuit available. There's no obvious remedy for somebody who has a grievance based upon the policy that you've implemented. But it might still be wrong to do it. It might still be unconstitutional in a deep and fundamental sense, and that it's unrepublican. What Levin wants us to do is to say that to be constitutional means more than finding a way to get it past the courts, right? That there's a broader set of principles, a set of virtues that are embedded in the Constitution more implicitly than explicitly, and yet are just as important, if not more important, than the particular details that we can have our squabbles over from one Supreme Court session to the next.
Think of the Federalist Papers, Matt. We spent a lot of time, I think 2013 through 2015, going through each of the Federalist Papers. And one of the things that becomes clear when you read the Federalist Papers, which is the case for the new Constitution, is just how much of the project, above and beyond introducing a new modern science of politics, deals with questions of character. You think of the most famous Federalist Papers, Federalist 10, Federalist 51, even Federalist 1. They're talking about things that trip human beings up, and how do we deal with human character that hasn't changed just because you've moved into a modern world. There's still a jealousy that defines a lot of our relations with others. There are wrong thinking, a wrong sense of ambition, wrong ends, and the Federalist Papers are loaded with a moral language as they describe the architecture of the federal Constitution, right? That what is being put forth is a great republic that can be made great dependent upon the character of the people who help make it great. And so it's one of those things where I remember a long time ago meeting Antonin Scalia at a Washington event, and he said, when I was talking about the Federalist Papers, he said, you know that in no law school are the Federalist Papers taught any longer. And I couldn't believe it, but it goes to show you something, right? That type of understanding, we have a lot of former students who studied law, but that type of understanding of what went into the human element that goes into the Constitution, I think is lost upon not only citizens, but people who actually function in these roles. Politics is not simply transactional. It's about matters of right and wrong, justice and injustice that requires hard work of everyone.
Yeah, I think that's just where Levin wants to leave things at the end of this piece, for people to appreciate that it's really time for the American people to reclaim their Constitution, and not in like a flag waving, we're taking our country back kind of way, but to say, no, this is actually a document for us, right? This is a document that speaks to us, that has instruction for us. This is not just for the lawyers, not just for the members of Congress who are trying to figure out how to get their law through, not just for presidents who are trying to figure out, can I find some justification for the exercise of this new form of executive power, on my pen, my phone, to do some things that maybe it hasn't been able to do up until this point. But it's actually for people, that the Constitution speaks to people and instructs us as citizens and allows us to then engage as we do, not just in elections, but the other days of the year and of the quadrennial period, engage as citizens in a meaningful and hopefully productive way in aiming toward the common good. So as we wrap this up, just want to raise a possibility here. Dave, you mentioned our work on the Federalist some years ago. And if I'm looking at the calendar, there are 45 days from the day when this episode's published, September 20th, to Election Day. So 85 Federalist essays, 45 days. 2 Federalist essays a day is a lot to ask. If you look at the outline of the essays, you find that beginning with Federalist 37, you start to get into the Constitution itself. You've got 14 essays on the virtues of the Union, 8 essays on the vices of the Articles, and then 14 essays on kind of the general powers of government that are required in order to save the Union and improve the Articles. But with 37, you begin to look at the details of the Constitution. From 37 to 85, that's the basic theme the rest of the way, and it's under the broad heading of the republicanism of the Constitution. So if you want the heart of the Federalist teaching on republicanism and the heart of its encounter with the text of the Constitution, you go 37 to 85. Now that's 49 essays, so we're getting there, right? We're getting pretty close. I'm going to excuse you from 4 essays. There's 3 essays, 59 to 61, on the debate over whether it's proper for Congress to be able to set the time, place, and manner of elections. Read those if you have time. It's okay to skip them. You've also got 67. If you're still fired up about the injustice of the anti-federalist Cato intentionally misreading the language on who gets to appoint senators when a senator dies, then definitely read that essay. But if you're willing to let that go, you can skip that one too. And so you get 45 essays, 45 days. And the beauty of it is you don't just finish on Election Day. But Essay 85 has this beautiful passage about a third of the way in where Hamilton is basically turning the matter over to the people. They spent 6+ months feverishly writing essays, an amazing project to try to defend the Constitution. They've done what they can do. The product of all their learning, all their effort, Madison, Hamilton, a little bit of John Jay. And now it's time for the vote to be counted. The New York and Virginia conventions are going to begin shortly, and they've done all they can from the standpoint of making the argument. And so he turns it over to the people and says, now it's in your hands. Prove you're worthy of self-government, in essence. Do not allow any partial motive, particular interest, pride of opinion, temporary passion or prejudice to get in the way of your judgment, but rather according to the best of your conscience and understanding and the sober and genuine dictates of your judgment, choose well. And while that's a charge related to the Constitution, and obviously the stakes are higher, thankfully the stakes were higher in that vote than they are in any quadrennial vote for president or biannual vote for Congress or whatever. Nevertheless, that charge, I think, is a good charge for every American voter to take up, that you have a responsibility to prove yourself worthy of self-government.
So what you're asking here, Professor Parks, is for our listeners to spend as much time reading the Federalist Papers as they have watching Hamilton over and over and over again. I was going to say there's something more to Hamilton, that he's not going to miss his shot, right? That he's actually giving us a shot. And you see that shot in Federalist 1 and Federalist 85, which is probably where I would begin if you were going to get inspired to read those 45. Read 1 and 85, where he talks about you, and then go to those essays, like you mentioned, 37 through 84, where he goes through the character of each of these branches of government, these institutions, what type of people we're looking for and why. And you've done that. You've done your part as a citizen these next 6 weeks to put things in their proper stakes and proper context.
Okay. Well, we're going to now turn to the grade book. And as we do that, and as we, again, try to think a little bit longer term, I want to think about the way that certain institutions and individuals on the center right, part of the broad coalition of those on the center right, contribute or don't contribute to the health of the republic. All right, Dave, so I'm going to start with your favorite, Republican Party establishment. The RNC, Mitch McConnell, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it tends to be conservative, but not the conservatism that I embrace. It's conservative in the sense that it conserves its power. It's interested in maintaining its place, being able to open doors or have doors opened for it. Do I believe that the Republican Party establishment is one that is going to work toward the goal that we've put forward, that Levin says is necessary, in which we understand that more human element to the Constitution? Probably not. But if I know anything about the Republican Party establishment, if it notices that something good is going on, it won't get in your way. It'll put its finger up in the air and say, okay, this may be something silly, but that I wouldn't be interested in doing, but all right, if it doesn't hurt me, I won't be against it. That was my experience in New Hampshire politics anyway. So I'm going to be kind and give the Republican Party establishment a D.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say a C because, you think about, I mentioned Mitch McConnell. Somebody's got to figure out a way to get the bills through the Congress. And one of the things that we find sometimes with the insurgents that get into Congress, who great ideas, great vision, but they kind of like their media role maybe more than the role of doing some of the heavy lifting to actually turn the vision into policy. And so that's where those old hands can be helpful. Get out the vote efforts, right? Likewise, kind of the institutional structure of these things. So you don't want them leading the show, but you kind of got to have them in tow. You want them following the parade. You need some of the broader institutional support maybe if you're going to actually execute a plan that's wisely conceived and led by somebody who's not part of that establishment. All right, second group, old line conservatives, I'm going to call them. So the critics today, you might hear them called Conservative Inc., but I'm talking about Heritage Foundation, I'm talking about AEI, where Levin is actually, National Review, kind of old guard conservative institutions. As we look forward, what do you think, Dave? What grade would you give them as their contribution for the reinvigoration of our politics?
Well, I think the argument that's been made against Conservative Incorporated is a good argument, but I'm not so sure that that's what was intended by the people who became part of Conservative Incorporated. So I think a lot of great discussions took place at a variety of different symposia and all the rest, and we've been to some of these in Washington, D.C., but I think oftentimes that discussion led to nowhere. It didn't thereafter produce a marshaling of resources across the country. It didn't produce kind of a spreading out or dissemination towards an educated citizenry, and it often produced a great amount of wealth and well-being and fame for the people who were part of Conservative Incorporated. But I don't think that was necessarily their intention. I think that if they were to do it all over again, that they probably would have done things differently. So I think the intentions were good. So I'd give them an A there. But in terms of the follow-through, it didn't really work out as it was supposed to. So it was a more of a C- in how it worked out, which you have to average it to. I'd probably put old line conservatives somewhere around a B. So what would I hope? I would hope that they would learn from this 30, 40-year experience, not give up on doing things like Levin has done in this piece, but how do you take what you want and think should happen in theory and make it happen in the practical world? That's how you move from a B- B to an A.
Yeah, there's no doubt that has to happen. And that's one of the weaknesses of the conservative movement, the old line conservative movement. I think the difficulty is that those that are challenging them on the establishment side don't have any ideas and are too pliable when it comes to principles. And then the kind of insurgency we're going to talk about next has some ideas, but more has kind of a mood, right? Has kind of a feel to it. And so while it may be that the old line conservatives, one more white paper coming out of Heritage or something, doesn't always move the needle in terms of the political conversation, somebody's got to do some of this work. Somebody's got to come up with creative proposals. Somebody's got to advance intellectual arguments, even if that's not the sum total of the matter, right? Even if you can get lost doing that and keep, get your eye off the ball of actual advancing a policy agenda and achieving political ends, someone still has to do that. And what I don't see is anybody else out there on the center right who's well positioned to do that. So I'm going to hope that, as you say, some of the lessons have been learned over the last decades, and that in the absence of anybody else being well positioned to fill this gap, the intellectual gap, that this group will revitalize itself. And I'm going to say a B+ moving forward. All right. Thirdly, we've got the conservative and populist insurgents. And this could be more recent. So like Tucker Carlson, American Greatness, Turning Point USA. But Rush Limbaugh, I think, has really positioned himself in this way, even though he might have been an old line conservative in another era, but he sort of rebranded himself, I think, for the Trump era. Others have as well. So how about that group as we move forward, regardless of what happens on November 3rd? Right? How does that group fit into the mix as we move on from here?
Well, I think the challenge for that group is if you can rightly identify something that's wrong with the conservative movement, Conservative Incorporated, at that point, do you thereafter humbly try to propose a remedy in which you're working with those individuals who, or those groups who kind of turned the conservative movement in the wrong direction or didn't allow it to kind of marshal its resources in the right way? So do you work to improve, to make that which wasn't great better, or do you just continue to be upset at that old guard for what they did wrong? And so I'm very much in favor. I think Rush Limbaugh has done tremendous things. I very much enjoy Tucker Carlson at times. There are some great pieces that you see on American Greatness, but I think there's got to be a level of respect, of form that is sometimes lacking here. So I would once again say, the correction is necessary, so that's why I give the conservative and populist insurgents an A-A. But the manner of proceeding and trying to build a coalition thereafter can't simply be pointing a finger and winning at all costs. So that part of it would be more average. So likewise, I put them right around a B minus B with the hope that, I guess what I'm trying to say here, Matt, is that I don't see it as necessary that these two groups, the old line conservatives and these populist insurgents, can't find a way to come back together. I'm hopeful that if we're going to overcome the hurdles, the mountain actually that's before us, that's going to happen.
I agree. I think there's probably some things on both sides. There's definitely a matter of humility and graciousness that's just lacking among the insurgents in general. I don't think it's productive in the long run from the standpoint of achieving the political purposes. So there needs to be some working together of these last two groups, really all three groups. That's the challenge here, right? They're all three going to have to play their part, and finding a way for the groups to work together well so that they can, where they have common ends, actually achieve their common purposes is, I think, critically important going forward. And it's been a rough 4 years for this, honestly. Right? I think there's been a tearing apart at the seams, and whatever happens in November, that movement's going to have to be stronger going forward because the progressive movement has gained strength in that time.
But we do have a model, right, in the founding where, we do see these three different types, coming together, the thinking, the marshaling together that helps, pull the country in the right direction. Kind of the admixture of greatness, the desire for greatness and honor, but also goodness and ethic. I think those are these main elements of what make conservatism great when it is great.
We wrap it up each week with the Tocqueville's crystal ball. And last week we introduced a new way of organizing this by taking a look at 5 different contests from 5 different sports for the weekend to come. We're going to vary the sports from week to week as the seasons vary and as our whims dictate. It was a good week for me last week, not so good for Dave. I went 4-1. He was 1-4. Round 2 this week. We start with the NFL. New England at Seattle. And this is a sucker thing for you, Dave, because I think it's impossible for you not to pick the Patriots.
Yeah, but I think this week I will take the Patriots and the 4 points.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, a 3-point loss would actually be enough, right? So can they go on the road to Seattle? Always tough, those West Coast trips against Russell Wilson. Belichick's been saying some very nice things about Russell Wilson over the course of the week.
But no 12th man, as the Seattleites are proud of their 12th man status. There will not be a 12th man on the field that day. So yeah, Patriots for the points.
All right, I'm gonna say Seattle. I think Seattle got off to a great start last week, and I don't know, Cam Newton looked great, but I'm not sure they can do 15 carries for 75 yards every week. And if he has to throw, I'm not sure he has the weapons just yet. If they've got everybody on the same page, N'Keal Harry still feels like he's a ways away. So I think I'm going to stick with Seattle. All right, number 2, Denver at the Lakers tonight in the bubble. Lakers are favored by 7 points. Denver out of nowhere knocks off Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers in 7 games. What do you think? Can they take out the Lakers too?
Well, the Lakers lost the first game against the Rockets, and the Nuggets are on a roll. So I'm going to say the Nuggets take this game as well. I don't know if they'll win the series, but I think they'll make it interesting. So I'm going to pick the Nuggets here. Okay,
I think that they're going to make it an interesting series too, but I have a feeling that the Lakers, who have just seen the Clippers lose 3 in a row, are not going to be caught napping on this one. I think they're going to come out strong. I think they cover the 7 points and then some. Now, they may have a letdown after that, and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes 6-7 games. I have a feeling game 1 they're going to be up for it, and they're going to make sure they don't have the same thing happen that happened to the Clippers. All right, we're going back to the Premier League. Big match. Chelsea at home against Liverpool. Liverpool, the defending champions. Chelsea done a lot of business during the transfer window, looking to close the gap, maybe make that top 2 of Liverpool, Manchester City, a top 3, maybe challenge for the title themselves. What do you think, Dave? No fans there either, but still the home ground tends to help a little bit.
I'm going to take Chelsea in this one. Yeah, I think that they win this at home. I've got a feeling that they're going to pull this one out.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go the opposite. I think it's going to be Liverpool. Given that Chelsea is a big rival of Tottenham, I'm going to root against them anyway. So I'm going to pick Liverpool for maybe some of the same reasons that you would pick the Patriots regardless of the actual situation. All right, we've got the U.S. Open Golf Championship. And, of course, this is being played even as we speak, and I've got the leaderboard up. And just as I was pulling it up, it changed. Patrick Reed made a birdie. So Patrick Reed is now -4. Got 3 holes to go in the second round. Bryson DeChambeau is in the clubhouse at -3. We've got several other players, but only a few others under par, including Justin Thomas, a few other notable names, Bubba Watson near the top of the leaderboard, John Rahm. Who's going to win the U.S. Open, Dave?
Yeah, it's amazing leaderboard, right? Because you have all Reed is kind of a good villain, right? DeChambeau gained 45 pounds in muscle over the last weight. I'm not saying it's steroids, but it could be a wrestling match by the time this thing is done.
Reed and DeChambeau would be fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I see Bubba Watson. He's not too far behind right now. He's tied for 10th. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say Bubba Watson comes back. He had a good second round. That if he can stay within 2 or 3 shots, the lead by today, I think he could pull this off. So, and that which would be quite dramatic, right? Because from what I've read, the storm and all that came through Sally, kind of right in his backyard. So we'll see. That's the I'm choosing that narrative. Bubba Watson takes the U.S. Open. Okay.
All right. Yeah, that'd be fun. So I think I'm gonna take Patrick Reed. He comes up big sometimes in the majors, and he's got one of those just doesn't care kind of attitudes. I think Bryson DeChambeau is such a pain to play with because he's so slow and he's got all these weird habits and things. And I think he kind of rattles people sometimes. But I think Patrick Reed would just kind of get mad about all that, and he might very well do better because of it. So looks like if things end the way they are now, they'll be the 2 that are paired tomorrow and who knows on Sunday. I think Patrick Reed hangs in there, holds on, and wins the U.S. Open.
That's in your backyard as well, right? So
it is not far from here. I know there was a time when we looked at some of these upcoming majors and we thought, we should really rent out our house during, these tournaments, and even the U.S. Open tennis, right? Not too far from where we are.
Right.
But that was before COVID. We've got one more. We saved the best for last, the most important. Yankees at Red Sox. This pathetic Red Sox season has got to come to an end soon, and it will come to an end, I guess, next weekend. But in the meantime, we got one more series against the Yankees. It's been a terrible year all the way around, but especially against the Yankees. The question, we're not going to try to imagine the Red Sox could sweep this series, but the question I've got for you, Dave, over under 1 win for the Red Sox out of 3.
Wow. So I went real quickly on my internet to try to figure out who's pitching for the Red Sox, but that probably wouldn't do us any good since the team ERA is 6 runs a game.
It's horrific. Yeah.
Horrific. So I'm going to say the Yankees win 2 and the Red Sox win 1. So the Red Sox take 1. So
yeah, Yankees have won 8 in a row coming into this, so that's not great. Red Sox have won 5 out of the last 10, so they're hot too, in a relative sort of way, in a 2020 kind of way. So I agree with you. I think they can take one of them. Their best pitcher went yesterday, so that doesn't help. But they'll maybe catch them napping one out of 3 games. But this horrible season is drawing to a close. Honestly, winning 1 out of 3 is probably a net win for the Red Sox, given the expectations of where we are at this point. And then soon it can all be over, and we can start thinking about how they might spend all that money they saved by trading Mookie Betts and actually get some pitchers for next year.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thanks, as always, for listening. We appreciate your support. Please don't forget to follow the show, subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. And we look forward to talking to you again next week.